Hey there, and welcome to episode 100 of Into the Terminal. That's right, 100 episodes we've been at this. And so I'm joined by my co host Nate and my co host Scott. Really excited. We've got 100 commands we're going to cover in this episode. So, with that said, why don't we dive on in? Scott, you want to lead us off?
Yeah. So one of the things that we started with very early was getting a Red Hat subscription and like standing up your machines. But I'm continually reminded that people have not seen RHEL in a while. So let me just tell you what it's like working with this subscription now. I've got this machine and I want to install some more software, but it needs to be subscribed first. So I'm just going to register it. And my password, which is, of course, I wish Eric it was my bestest friend. And that's it.
Remember when our default password was nice hair for a while?
I
All right.
thought about growing it back out, just saying.
So at this point, the machine's registered, and like now I have access to all the Red Hat content and all the stuff stored in the Red Hat repositories. So I can do things like see what software I want. So maybe I want to install something that's web console related, but I can't remember exactly what it's called. So I'm just going to do a DNF list star cockpit star. And that's going to show me all the stuff installed on this machine that complies with that, plus all the stuff available there under available packages. And
We could do an episode about all the ways to find the thing that it is that you want to install, like DNF provides, DNF search, DNF list.
so we actually did do an episode on both subscription management and also on managing packages with RPM. So there's been some of that content already. All right, but now that you know what you want, maybe we just install something. So you tell it the name of the and we'll pull down any dependencies, and you can say, yes, go ahead and install this. And there you go. You've installed a package. Maybe you want to remove a package. So you tell it you want to remove a package. And it'll look at the installed machine and say, oh, I see these are the packages. And there you go. Gets removed. If you're interested in seeing what's already on your system, DNF list installed. So this will go through and show you everything that's there. And you can use it with tools like grep, which Eric will talk about in a bit. But realize that DNF is a front end to RPM and the RPM database. That's our packaging technology. So I also like to use RPM QA to give me a list. That'll give me the name, the version, and the architecture of the package. What's missing from this compared to DNF list installed is the repository that provided me the software. And then you can also look at a bunch of metadata. One that I use a lot is rpm-q change log and the name of a package, because it'll show you all the changes that have been made over time to that package version. And so this is something I use a fair amount for things like, has a bug been fixed? And if so, in which version? Or has a CVE been mitigated? And if so, in which version? Yeah. So you can see the CVE numbers here are listed in the change log. But yeah, so that's a little bit on package management. But Eric, we did episodes, and I can't remember what the episodes were.
So in the chat and following the episode in the show notes will be links to previous episodes. For the first 7 commands in our episode today, you can check out episode 22, subscription management, and episode 33, managing packages with RPMs.
I think there was an episode on CVEs where we talked about that changelog one as well. Maybe I'll have to dig that up and add that.
I think Nate volunteered to find that one. Maybe Nate can track that down. Well, Scott, I think you're next with system management. So we've got our
Yeah, so
packages,
look,
we've got our services installed. Let's go from there.
exactly. So now that we've got the machine registered, we've downloaded some software and installed it, we're ready to run it. So maybe we're doing something like systemctl start. And I'm just going to start up a web server. So I'm running Apache. But how do I know it's really running? So I can do a systemctl status, and that'll tell me that it's active right here. It's running. And if I want to no longer run it, systemctl stop. Right. And if I look at the status again, right, it is inactive, dead.
Should we
The
hold
other
a
thing that
funeral?
is
So ominous.
The other thing that I often use with systemctl is restart. So if you make a change to a configuration file, you need to start the service using its new configuration file. Systemctl restart and the name of the service. And so that actually performs two actions. It does a stop and then does a start back again. So you can see that Apache is running again. And then one that we use a fair amount here on the show is if we install a new service. Like an email server, Postfix. I know. By default, when we install it, it does not get started automatically. Not only that, typically when you install services on Red Hat Enterprise Linux, it will not activate automatically at boot. So if you manually started it with systemctl, but then rebooted your machine, it wouldn't be running when it came back up the next time. And so for in our shows, you'll often see us use systemctl enable, which sets the service to start at boot time, -- now, and also start it right now, and the name of the service. Right. So that'll not only add a symbolic link into our startup systemd setup, so that at boot time the service will start automatically, but also it'll get it running right now. So if I do a systemctl status, right, we can see that it's running right enable. You'll also see up here that it's enabled, which tells me it will start automatically at boot time. But we did an episode, or actually multiple episodes, on services and systemd. Eric, what did we do there?
So if you look back to episode 81, we looked at top 5 systemd tasks where we went into these different actions in a little bit more detail. Episode 82, 6 types of systemd files, which was a deeper dive into the services, timers, and a few other topics, as well as episode 83, building systemd services. So I think Nate took the lead on that episode and talked about Nate took the lead on that episode and talked about building your own systemd service file.
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. That was a while ago. It feels like a while ago, but it wasn't that long ago.
18 episodes ago? 17?
Yeah.
All right, so we are doing 100 episodes. This is our 100th episode, and we're doing 100 commands. Now, I got to say, guys, we've got to scrap the episode and start over. Shantanu said using variations of the same command does not count as separate commands.
I reject Shantanu's reality and substitute my own.
There, perfect. Well, I mean, I suggested that think of it more as 100 different actions, because systemctl start and systemctl stop are two very, very different outcomes.
And actually, we had this religious discussion in our show prep a few days ago, where it's like, should we allow that to occur as we're making our list of 100? And you can blame Manager Scott, who said, if the command produces significantly different function or output, it should be permitted as a separate command because it's doing something entirely different.
Yeah, maybe it should be 100 actions instead of 100 commands, but that is a good point, right? So if the command significantly differs, yeah, right, it doesn't sound as good.
Is it a good point? I don't know.
So you see what happens when you put the three of us together, and this is a perfect time to go in and like this episode, share it with a friend. This one's supposed to be lighthearted and fun, so you'll see some additional banter. If you haven't already, go ahead and subscribe to our channel. That way you see when we produce other content like this. But we're going to keep on going because we are 12 commands in and we're 10 minutes into the episode. Go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to say, Eric, you get to kick us off with lucky number 13.
Oh gosh, you did that on purpose, didn't you?
Maybe.
All right. So host Eric doesn't spend nearly as much time as he used to on the command line, and I tend to forget things like obvious. How do I run a thing? And so in preparation for this episode, I was working on running a few different commands, maybe some of the arguments I'd forgotten. So one of the nice things to do is knowing how to get help on how to get help with your commands when you're in the command line. Sure, you can go over to Google, that works great, but not always do you have a chance to go in and look at Google. Sometimes all you have is a terminal and a prayer. So that's where the man page comes in. And I think I remember that command for a long time because it's like, man, how do I run that command? But it's actually short for manual, and you can search by keyword. So maybe I'm setting up a new user account and I want to remember how to set up their password. So I can do a manual keyword search for, say, the password command. Or technically, this is how do I search for commands related to a password. So it will do a search for all the man pages within our Linux system. And these come installed by default. You didn't have to do anything else. And I see Shantanu still in defiance about our episode. So here's what I wanted to do. I wanted to be able to change the expiration date for a user account. So first command on the list is actually the change command. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in deeper on that and see how do I use the change command to get the expectations that I was looking for. Maybe it's a contractor, and I want to specify the last day that contractor is going to be able to log into our systems. Maybe I just need a brief description. And I can kind of skim through here. In fact, fun fact, you can use the / and then search for a keyword, and you can skim through it using the N key for next. Next up is what if I'm running a command looking at you, LVM, and I forget exactly how to do a specific argument for a command? But sticking with our change, let's do a change -H. That's -H for help. And lovely, it gives me a very short explanation of some of the different options I can use in this command. So if I forgot account information for a user account, I can do now I can see that I can do a list and see when the last time the rel account changed its password, which was today, because that's when I spun up the lab system. So Scott, I think we had a few episodes on help in the past.
Indeed, so 15. Yeah, built-in help, and episode 86, a more recent one on finding help in the distribution. And Eric, you're going to continue us on with editors and tools, right?
Yes, I am.
I want to see Eric use Emacs.
way to blow my.
I'm sorry. I'll be quiet.
So we actually ended up with more than 100 commands. So we took a few out, and I was going to make the joke about how we were going to install Emacs and then we couldn't exit the file, so it ruined the episode. But then I realized in RHEL 9 that Emacs actually is not installed in the minimal base image for RHEL 9 anymore. So we were going to talk about Nano. We were going to talk about Emacs, but they weren't installed, so we decided to jettison those. But we can talk about the vim command, which is also the vi command, and yes, Emacs, just close the entire window. That's how I've exited in the past.
I mean, Vim's the only editor you need anyway, right?
It is the one and only editor. In fact, I know people that use Vim like an IDE, so why not?
I was there.
So because we were planning ahead for this episode, and we're not frantically working on it an hour before the show went live, we actually created a text file here on this system, and we wanted to impart some wisdom, some wise sayings from our past. So I created a text file called wisdom.txt Fun fact, you actually don't need file system extensions in Linux. We covered that a little bit in more detail in a previous episode, so I'm going to use vim to call a file. And I'll let you all read that off screen from the Linux system. Now I can use I for inserts, and I can add text. I can use escape to exit, and then a :X to exit the file. That'll save my changes and exit. And so again, we had an episode 84, called Linux-based text editors, where I think Scott and Nate went through and talked about Vim, Emacs, Nano, and a couple of others at length. So check that episode out. One of the other tools, one of my favorites, and probably one of the all-time most popular episodes of Into the Terminal ever, was episode 32, where we covered one of my favorite utilities ever, called tmux. So tmux is a terminal multiplexer, aka I need to do things and I need more than one window, but I only have one terminal. So as you can see, it kind of changes our prompt a little bit, and that allows me to start doing some things. So maybe I can use cat and check out the wisdom file that we were looking at before, and then I need to go run something on the system. So if you use Control B, that is the command key for tmux, and I could do a Control B D to disconnect, as long as I don't wait too long for the command to time out. And you notice instead of exiting, it says that we detached from session 0. That's how you exit Emacs, is you just put it in a tmux window and just ditch that session altogether. So now if I've got multiple sessions running, I can do a tmux ls. That'll tell me that I've got one session open, session 0, and it's got one window within it. And then if I want to reattach to that one, I can do a tmux attach, and it brings me right back where I was. This does not even cover the basics of tmux and how powerful it is. So check out episode 32 of Into the Terminal to find out more. But we're not done, because
far from
tmux and text editors are not enough. Sometimes you need to use, say, the tail command to look at the bottom of a file. So if you look at tail, we can look at var log messages, which is very typical for your troubleshooting processes. And so tail will actually show you the bottom 10 or so lines of a text file. But let's say you're doing something in real time, tail, and you want to follow the output of that file. We can use the -f argument and use messages. So now as anything is being written to varlog messages, it'll show up on the screen. And but Shantanu, before you say anything, that was actually one command. I just showed you two alterations of it. So 1, 2, and 1. So there. If you want to exit out, Control C brings you back to your regular terminal. And then let's say we're looking for a specific specific text string I speak for a living within a file. So we were looking at the rel user account earlier. So let's check etc password to see how this is configured. So within the etc password file, you can see that rel's got its own line. Its UID is 1003. Its group ID is 1004. It's got a home directory of /home/rel, and it's using the /bin bash shell. So that's grep, tail, tmux, vim, and actually vim, or yeah. So if you want to learn more about tmux, check out episode 32.
And I'm sure we did.
I'm with both. Sorry, go ahead.
I'm sure we did an episode on grep and regular expressions at some point. So
I think you and I did early on. I'll see if I can track that one down.
Yeah, because like grep one string, child's play. Grep 47 characters that mean meta functions.
Piping it 2 or 3 times.
Man, the weird incantations that I have done at the command line to try to find certain things out of logs before we had, better tools for said things, like log analysis tools and whatever. It's crazy. Piping it through sed and awk and grep and all kinds of tr.
Then you use cut a couple of times to clean it up.
Yeah, right. Right.
It's crazy.
Nate, have you looked at the session recording lab that we have out on lab.redhat.com?
Have I looked at it? Yes, I've seen it. Why?
Yeah, so like the very last step in there is to use the tlog play command to replace someone's session. And we
Yes.
wanted to make it copy pastable. And so I wrote the gnarliest regular expression with
So bad.
go into the log file and grab the UUID of the session that we recorded earlier in the lab. And it's like, I pasted that last week at a conference on the screen. I was like, just pretend like this is just a UUID.
I was there. You apologized before pasting it.
Don't worry about it. You don't need to know what star caret dot star is. Just fine.
Ignore the man behind the glass.
And I'm pretty sure the lab description underneath it says, by the way, if you don't know what this means, don't worry. It's okay. This is in the end, this is what you get. just pay no attention to the man behind the curtain.
Yep. But it's baseball. Mission accomplished.
Right. And I
So
just want
we've
to
done-
say that I'm with Richard and I think Marco both in the chat. I'm a screen guy, Tmux, whatever. Screen is gone and I'm sad.
Well, I was also a screen guy, but now that it's only available through extra packages for Enterprise Linux repository, and I only use the default, I have now converted to be a Tmux person. And you know what? It's
Right.
bad. I don't mind it so
I've
much.
done
Now-
some Tmux too. It's not bad, but yeah, I
So
do miss screen. I had all the muscle memory, and now I've got to reprogram it.
The only
So
constant is
actually-
change.
That's true. So I used for how to do XYZ. I started finding Tmux references instead. So I was like, well, I'll try it. And so I switched. And I switched pre-announcement of screen being deprecated. So win for the IT.
Aren't you just very full of forethought and luck?
So fortunately, some of these are a little bit easier to talk through because right now we've gone through 21 commands in 22 and a half minutes. So Nate, why don't you take the con and let's
I'm gonna
talk
try
about
my
some
best.
networking.
And so networking can sometimes be complicated, and anyone who remembers the days when we were doing IP tables and IP chains even to manage our local host firewall should be happy for firewall command, firewall CMD through firewall D. So I'm going to give you a quick example of how to open a simple port with firewall CMD. And there's more complexity to this available. I'm giving you many numbers in there. There we go. So what this is going to do is it's going to add port 4242 TCP to the running configuration. This will not survive a reboot. It doesn't get written to the config. So if I restart the firewall, this is going to go away. But that's fine for this example, right? Now you might be like, well, how do I see what's actually open in the firewall already? There's another very simple command to get that. And again, this can be filtered down with more command line arguments, but we're not going to go into them. List all will simply say, here's all the ports, whatever, that are currently in existence in your firewall, right? So you can see right here is port 4242 that I just added. You can get crazy specific with this by adding in zones and by adding in sources and destinations. But again, I think we have other episodes where we talk about firewalling. And if we don't, we should. Maybe that's another topic. All right, another really cool tool that has evolved over the years. The days of managing your network configuration via text files is mostly gone. NMCLI, and there's a couple other tools like NM2E, which I think is deprecated at this point. There's a graphical version that runs in the web console, but NMCLI is a really handy one that runs at the command line. I'm going to give you two examples of just like what NMCLI can do. So there's NMCLI con show. And you can use shorthand for these things. You notice I forgot the W in show. That's muscle memory again, because lazy sysadmins are lazy. You type as few characters as you can. I'm going to show it to you on another machine too, to give you a much more interesting output. This is my home lab hypervisor. And there's a whole bunch more interfaces here because I've got a bunch of like bridges and virtual networks, and there's containers running here. There's all kinds of crazy stuff that goes on this machine. So you can see that it's actually paginated, and there's color coding that goes along with, I forget what the colors stand for, but there's color coding that goes along with the type of connection and whether it's active or not. They'll show up red if they're inactive, that kind of cool stuff. So NMCLI, another great networking tool. Let's see, what do I got next? IP. There's a whole suite of commands within the IP subset, right? Let me clear the screen so you guys can see better here. Let me go back to a simpler display first here. So IP is just this general interface to the IP substack or IP stack of your machine. So if you do IP address or ADDR or just IPA will get you what you need, because like I said, shorthands work here. It'll show you the IPs that are associated with your system. And again, if you go to a more complicated system, more complicated interfaces will show you more data in there, right? Then we've got IP route. If you remember, there used to be a command that was just route, I think. That might still exist, but IP route is the new way. IP route just shows you, here are all the routes for the different interfaces. And as I said before, more interfaces means more complex routing. So you can see on my hypervisor, there's a ton more routes in there. And this is all based on how your TCP stack will decide how to route packets around. Okay, let's see. Next, we got IP link.
So Nate, real quick question from the audience, and sure. I felt this was appropriate. So Aaron asks, how do you know when a shorthand will work for a command?
I'd imagine that
my knee-jerk reaction was just try it.
Yeah, well, so the manual page and whatnot will probably give you some indication, but generally I've only found it through like use, I try to type a command or I see an example online and I notice that they're using shorthand and boom, it works, right? Not all commands will let you do that. IP lets you do it. Pray, that's a good answer. Thank you, Richard. IP lets you do it. NMCLI lets you do it. In fact, I didn't know NMCLI let you do it at first. And then one day I just typoed a command or I missed a letter in a command and it worked. And I'm like, oh, look at that. It does shorthand. So there you go, right? There's no science to this. All right, where was I? IP link. This will just give you like a quick rundown of the Ethernet interfaces that are in your machine, MAC address information, and whether they actually have a link or not, right? So that's sometimes useful in troubleshooting. This one's really cool for if you're trying to troubleshoot network connectivity, and it's called IP neighbor. This will tell you about the neighbor addresses that are known about in your IP stack on your machine. And again, shorthand, IP nay. I'm talking to horses here, right? So you can see that this machine only knows about one other machine, right? That's because this is another machine that it has talked to, that it's reached out to. What's so funny?
I was not expecting that.
And then again, we got on my hypervisor, IP nay is like, oh, look at all these things. I've got addresses in here from my Podman containers. I've got addresses in here from my VMs, all kinds of great stuff. So again, this doesn't like scan your subnet and figure out what all of the local addresses are. These are things that are in, I think it's in the ARP cache for this particular machine. And we go way deep on networking to talk about what ARP caches are and what, but there's no way we have time for that today.
We have not covered that topic in ITT. Maybe we should.
Yeah, right. Well, these are like networking concepts that maybe some Linux administrators don't care so much about. Maybe you should. I've built up all this knowledge over years and years of working with network gear and like wearing too many hats in my roles. Okay, moving on to the next cool command is SS. This is not the selective service. This is, I don't even know what SS stands for. Scott, why did we call this SS?
I don't know. I still use Netstat, so don't ask.
Yeah, well, this is the replacement for Netstat. Why? I don't know, but SS. I like this particular. So if you do just SS, boom, it gives you this very. I mean, I never use this output. This is very verbose output that just shows all the connection information on your machine, right? Let me clear this. The one I like to use, and I actually learned this in Red Hat training. -TULNP, and this is like TCP, UDP. Forget what L does. N is
Long.
networking, I think. P is protocol.
No,
Port. Sorry.
so L is long. N
Long.
is numeric.
Numeric. I guess that wouldn't be network. Of course it's network. Numeric. So
then SS must just be a rewrite of netstat, because I usually use netstat.
yes.
I could never figure out if it was like turnip or tulip or something, but I was like, oh yeah, that command.
Yeah. Socket statistics, says Marco. Thank you. So this tells you about ports that are open and listening on your machine, which is mostly what I care about as a systems administrator. Did the service that I started start up? Does it have the port listening? Are there ports listening that I don't think should be listening? That's a good thing to actually watch for from time to time, right? So SS is a great way to get that. There's a bunch of other data you can get out of SS. Again, we don't have time to dig too deep on SSS. Another great troubleshooting tool is TracePath, which is the replacement for Traceroute. I forget if Traceroute even exists anymore, or at least on a RHEL-box. In my case, the default
RHEL 9, I don't think
TracePath.
so.
Right. So TracePath is just like Traceroute. You give it a destination. We're going to Traceroute out to Google DNS server. And you'll see, right? Look at that. It's giving me each hop of the way, which gets out to my ISP and then dies. And the reason it dies is because my ISP probably has ICMP blocked. With ICMP blocked, Traceroute, TracePath, ping can't contact that particular spot in the route, right? So, but what this is doing is, what's my default gateway? Let's try to see if we can talk to it. Oh, we did. What's its default gateway? Okay, can we talk to that? What's that thing's default gateway? And it goes step by step by step by step until it gets to where you told it to go to. So you can see, right, it gets into my ISP. There's my cable company. Whatever those non-routables are, those are probably within my ISP's network, right? This isn't like crazy private data. This is data that you can get just by simply doing a trace. So, but yeah, you can see it even goes through, it even reports back on these non-routable addresses. It's able to reach them because of the magic of routing. So there we go.
This is a great command to memorize if you often get in arguments with your networking team. Oh, it's not the network, it's your system. Then you just do TracePath and go, look, here's the router in our data center. It's not getting to the other data center. Fix your stuff.
The number of times I've identified routing loops by using TracePath, because what you'll see is it'll get to a step and then it'll start looping between two routers. And what that means is one router has its default route somehow misconfigured that it loops back to the place it came from. And then, of course, that router says, no, it has to go this way. And then they just go back and forth like that. And the trace router will eventually die. But that's an indication of an actual routing problem between you and the destination. So you got to identify who owns that router. Hopefully, it's someone you can actually contact and tell them your router's misconfigured. And then, boom, you can get the problem fixed. So that's handy. That's probably the most useful thing I've seen with TracePath. All right. Next was ping. Ping is related. We're just going to ping my gateway. This will tell me, can I reach my gateway? Right? So in this case, on Linux, this will be a continuous ping. You have to Control C to stop it. There's command line arguments that'll do things like make it make noise when it pings. So if you're trying to monitor whether a system is up or whether it stays up or whether it misses pings, you can start a ping with a -A, I think is the command.
That will not annoy your coworkers at all, having it make beeping noises every ping.
Look, I'm telling you, in troubleshooting, it's immensely helpful because you can start the ping and have it beep every time, and then the window's off the side or behind another window, and you can tell audibly when it either stops pinging or starts pinging. So it's a useful tool.
Scott went a different direction with that than I was thinking. I was wondering if you did that, if you had to, before you typed it in, say one ping only, Vasily.
That's a
you could.
-C. -C will send the
-C, -C1. Ping -C1. Off the reservation.
My hunt for Red October. My hunt for Red October.
I didn't even catch it. Sorry.
Perhaps you can tell I am a Russian sub-captain by my accent.
That was actually really good.
The next one is a really fun tool. I have used Netcat and abused Netcat in so many ways, and there are so many terrible things you can do with Netcat that I do not suggest you leave it installed on your servers. But when you need it, you need it, right? I've used Netcat to move disk images across the network. It's crazy. So, and I'm going to give you a quick example. So you might remember we opened up a port earlier with Firewall CMD. See how I'm tying these together? It's great. We're going to make Netcat listen on the same port that I just opened. So we're going to do NC for Netcat -L, and then we're just going to give it a port. And then what you can do is you can redirect that output just like you can redirect anything. Normally what this will do is it'll just throw it to the screen. But we're going to move it, we're going to redirect it into a file. Just going to call it file because that's really creative. And then I'm going to use that as a way to show everybody's favorite command, telnet. I'm going to telnet over to the machine that I just opened that port on. What's the IP here? 121 on port 4242. And as long as I got all this right, look, we're connected. Now, what do we connect to? We connected to Netcat. Netcat is just listening, and it's just an open socket. Anything that I put in there will go through that socket into the file I just redirected it to. Now, you can do all kinds of crazy stuff. Like, if you're an attacker, you can use Netcat to open up a remote shell by piping this crap into bash. So that's why I said you shouldn't leave it on your machines. So we're just going to close the telnet connection by hitting control bracket and then close, and then you'll see telnet exit. And also you might have noticed in this other window here, my Netcat also exited. If I cat this file, you can see hello ITT. So, you know, pretty cool. Imagine if you had a file you needed to move, or if you needed to redirect output from one command to a command on another host, which is crazy like level. Why would I ever want to do that? It's great that you can if you need to.
So Nate, I would like to point out that in the past, on many of the episodes where we talk about networking stuff, when either Eric or I say telnet, like the chat immediately blows up with, "You morons! You cannot use telnet!" And yet, Nate does it. Nate does it. Everybody's like, "That's cool."
Everybody likes Nate.
What is this?
All right. So, all right, two more commands, wget and curl. They're both similar commands. They serve slightly similar but slightly different purposes. I like to use wget when I need to do like a recursive get of something, because I don't know that curl does that. At least I've never found a command that makes that easy in curl. With wget, it's just wget -r. You point it at a site, it'll clone a site down. Don't ask me why I'm cloning websites. You probably don't want to know. But curl will instead get that output and just display it to you, right? So we're going to show you wget. I just wget on redhat.com HTML file. If I cat that index HTML file, this is, I mean, if you were able to parse all that, this is redhat.com's main website, right? So, wow, I'm just got distracted by chat. Richard Rios wgetted his wife. Okay. Curl, I tried this with redhat.com and it gave me an empty page. So I don't know if we somehow don't like curl. Did we block the user agent? I don't know. But if we do a curl on, what's that?
Wait a second. Is Shantanu going to accept this as multiple commands? Because they do the exact same thing.
But they're different. So look,
and we only listed them as one command. This is number 35 on the list.
It is funny, though. These are different commands, and we listed as a single number. So sorry, Shantanu. Maybe it evens out in the end.
There you go.
Google will work, right? So if I do a curl on google.com, there you go. That's the output of Google. I mean, which, as you might imagine, is laden with scripting and God knows what else is in here. But somewhere in there is the search engine, I'm sure. Oh, look, there's some Japanese or something. Look at that. Fun. Okay, so yeah, curl and wget. Now, curl is really grab a specific thing. A lot of people like to, in their install instructions, do a curl or a wget that pipes directly into bash. Please don't do that. I give up fighting with amateurs. Thanks, Shantanu.
Episode 101, troll the hosts.
Yes, totally trying to do that. All right, so the next two, these are two separate ones, are SSH and SFTP. Now you might say, why not SCP? That's because SCP is deprecated. If you try to use it, it just backends it with SFTP anyway. I'm going to give you some really quick examples of these two. So we're going to go back. Well, here, we'll just do it on this command. If I go to SSH to my user at 10.0.0.28. This is the other test host that I was using earlier. You can see I get a shell from IPT0 to IPT1 as my user. Now I've got SSH key pairs set up here to make this simple. But there you go, SSH. This is primarily, I mean, if you guys don't know what SSH is, I don't know how you're managing your machines. This is the way, at least the way most of us, I would think, manage machines, right? You're SSHing into machines, unless you're 100% Ansible, in which case you're still using SSH because it's using this in the backend.
So Nate, I'm using Telnet for all my machines.
You're using Telnet to manage your machines? We used to do that, Scott. Used to do that. Long time ago, 30 years ago, I was still using Telnet to get into my Linux machines. It was a terrible idea. So many machines got compromised in those days. All right. The other one is SFTP. Dash here. We're going to go back to the same box, 10.0.0.28, and you'll see we get an FTP prompt. If I do an ls-a, you can see there's my home directory on the other host, right? So again, this is it's kind of simple. SFTP is made for moving files back and forth. SSH is made for connecting and getting a shell, right? And, both pretty handy utilities. And that's my cover of networking. Did I go too fast? Should I go back and do it all again? We have plenty of time, right?
Right over.
So-
So it's a good thing we gave producer Eric the day off, because we're 42 minutes in and we just covered command number 37.
Wow.
It just means we got to be faster for the rest.
Does it though? So if we're late to a meeting, we can just blame host Scott. So
Sorry, Manager
before we
Scott.
derail
Host
this
Scott
any
got in the
further,
way.
Scott, save us
All right. So file system management.
once I find your once I find your share. There it is.
Our episode on that was like way back, super early, episode 9. I think was the
Yeah,
last time we
don't
talked
watch it.
about file system management. Yeah, you're not wrong on that.
We'll talk
we've
about
had
why later.
90 practice our shtick. All right, so some file system stuff. First, you might be interested in seeing what file systems are there and their statistics. So DF talks about your disk free, and I like -H because it gives you in human readable sizes, and P I think is like pre-formatted, so it like makes this nice columnar output. There is another disk metric to look at though, besides the space, the disk space that you're consuming. So DF-I will show you the inodes that are in use. So inodes are basically a file pointer that tells me how to reassemble all the data blocks off of disk to reconstitute a file to retrieve it. And in some file systems like ext43 and others, it is a finite resource that's created when you make the file system. In other file system types like XFS, which is the default for RHEL 9, XFS uses dynamic inodes. So if you start to run out of them, we'll convert some data storage blocks into inode blocks to make more of them. But maybe you're interested in creating a new file system. So if we are just direct creating disk partitions and whatnot, we can use fdisk on our device. So this is my SCSI disk drive, and I'm going to create a new partition and use up the rest of the disk space. And I'm going to write my changes to disk. And Now, if I do an fdisk -l shotnu, don't worry, this is an include command. We could see there is dev sda3. But because this is boot disk, I need to run a command called part probe, which sends a signal to the kernel and says, hey, recache all the disk file system information, or sorry, all the disk partition information off of the disk. So part probe, ingest the partition information about your disks. All right, right now this is just raw space. So I can do an mkfs to make a file system on it. I'm going to do an ext4. If I wanted to make it an XFS formatted file system, and that would call the correct component backend utility to do it. I'm choosing ext4 because there's a really, really small partition. So small that the overhead formatting of XFS, including dynamic inode tables, it's not big enough. So ext4 is light enough of a file system that it can just handle this really tiny device. So now the device exists. We put a file system format on it so we could store and retrieve files out of it. However, it's not attached into my directory tree yet. So I have no way for applications to put files into it or get files back out of it. So we're going to mount it. So you tell it the device that you want to mount and then the directory where you would like to attach it. And ideally, this is an empty directory because once we mount it, those are the files and directories stored in this partition of SDA3. We would only be able to see the stuff in SDA3, and anything that was there previously would be hidden and inaccessible until you unmount that file system from the directory tree. If you're interested in seeing what your mounted file systems are, mount. So that I'll show you all kinds of information. It's DF that we looked at the very beginning of this segment also shows you mounted file systems, but this gives you things like the options that were used when performing the mounts, whereas DF just concentrates on the statistics. So that's a little bit on file systems. Should we move forward, Eric?
I have no banter around disk management. So yeah, why don't we jump into performance observability?
I guess file systems aren't as entertaining as networking.
I mean, honestly,
controversial? I don't know.
I say this, and Conan Kudo always I think I make his eye veins bulge when I say this. Really cares about storage until they can't get the files back out again. Then they really care about storage. But
they care about it when it works. They don't care about it when it works. They care about it when it doesn't.
So performance observability tools. We did a whole episode on these. Episode 95, performance with BCC tools. And we're not going to do BCC tools today, but they're a huge suite of tools that you can use for getting information about your system. Today, we're going to do stuff like, maybe we're interested in seeing what processes are running on the machine. So we have PS, process status, and I like all. Show me the username that owns it, and give me those processes, even those without a controlling terminal, which would include things like daemons. So these are all the processes running on my machine. Maybe you're interested in not just all the processes. Front top gives you a little bit of system information at the very top. And then it will refresh the list of top commands that are sorted by the amount of CPU they are consuming, and then secondary sorted on the amount of memory they're consuming on your system. And every so often, I think it's every 5 seconds, 3 seconds, it refreshes that list. All right, and then use Q to quit out of top when you're done with it. So somebody said about traceroute. Well, guess what? L9. You just have to install the traceroute RPM, and
Yay.
it is a deprecated tool. But the reason I decided to bring it up here is because it is also available in other Unixes and Linuxes. So while TracePath is a Linux native tool that is the new replacement, if you're working on your Mac, say, Traceroute is what you want instead of TracePath. If you're interested in how much memory you have, free. So I'll give you the amount of memory, how much is used, how much is available or free, how much is being used for shared memory, how much is being used for buffers and caches, and then available is actually free plus share plus buffer cache.
But is that free as in freedom, or freedom as in beer, or free as in beer?
That's as in free as in unallocated. Your memory tool is VMstat, and I'll give you your virtual memory statistics. So here we're looking at some information on processes. I don't remember what RMB stand for anymore. How much swap memory has been consumed, free memory, buffers, caches, and then it gives you statistics on different types of things like swap in and swap out operations, some IO data, blocks in and blocks out, some system information, and then some CPU information on like user consumed CPU cycles, system consumed CPU cycles, idle CPU cycles, IO wait cycles, and I don't remember what ST stands for anymore either. All right, this one is cool because you can pass it some other arguments that will actually have it continuously run. And so you can tell it an interval on how often it should wait. And then you'll just like build this list of series data over time that you can kind of see how things are changing on your machine. Similarly, we have one for IOStat. IOStat gives you the specifically block IO device information. So it starts off with some kind of general CPU stuff, but then you can see that per device, I have two, SDA and SDB, and we get the transactions per second. We get the kilobytes read per second and kilobytes written per second and kilobytes discarded per second. And then we just get a raw number of kilobytes read, kilobytes written, and discards. This also is something that you can run on an interval or a specific number of times, so you can generate some time series data to see what's happening on your machine over time. So if you're having intermittent problems or you're trying to like figure out if something is related to something else, you can run it kind of in a background terminal to generate this data, and then you can refer back to that data when the event that you're looking for occurs.
We were having weird disk latency problems once with our SAN, and IOStat was the savior. We basically ran it in the background every so often and collected stats so we could see when it was that it would slow down and things like that. Really, really helpful tool when you need it. Again, like no one cares until you need it.
For sure.
Right. So Nate, I added this one just for you. Time.
Time.
And that's not
Everyone's got time.
Yes. It's not system time, right? It's time as a wrapper for another command.
Right.
And so it runs the command that you wrapped, and then down here it tells you about how much time this thing took to complete. And it breaks it down into 3 categories. Real time, that's actually like I was a human and I experienced this much time during the completion of this command. User time, so this is how much clock cycles consumed on the CPU were tagged as user consumable clock cycles. And sys, system consumable clock cycles. And so I'm just going to do something silly like time top. Right, so top is an interactive command, right? It's running, and because I wrapped it with time, time is back there gathering data this whole time that the top command is running. It's just like figuring out, putting things in those 3 buckets so that when I quit the command, when the command exits, right, I'm told that almost 18 seconds of human time passed when this command was running. And then it was only using 0.011 seconds and 0.016 seconds of processor time for user-related tasks or system-related tasks. So this is expensive in human time, but not very expensive in CPU clock cycle time. All right, one that everyone hates. strace.
Do they hate it like they hate?
Good question. I don't think there is a command that they all hate more than telnet. At least not in my experience. Unless it's
except what
done
I
by
do.
Nate. Right, then they love it. I don't know. So strace is a command that will actually do a system call trace through the running of the utility. So bam. And it looks super gnarly when it barfs out its data. But what it's telling you, and actually let me run it again, but send it to less. What it's really doing is, scroll up here, it's telling me about all the system calls that this command made, right? So we could see a mmap at the very top. This command allocated some memory for itself. We could see open at, right? It opened a file. And we actually are told in the additional data over there on the side what file it was. And also you could see that there was an error code that was produced by some of those files that said no such file or directory. New file stat at. And this is actually at getting some statistics because I ran df, so I needed to figure out like how much disk space was used and stuff. So I used these system calls in order to produce that. And so what we're looking at is sequentially from the top, all the system calls made on this command. With df, that's not really that interesting because we know what to expect out of df. It's going to do some stuff to set up its environment. It's going to collect some data. It's going to print some tabular content on my file system usage. But where this is really handy is if you have problems with an application. So a lot of times for things like DNS troubleshooting, I'll attach a strace to a utility, and what I'll see is it'll like everything is kind of normal, and for varying degrees of what normal looks like, you have to figure that out. And then it'll just kind of like repeat the same cycle of things over and over and over again. If you look at that cycle, it's like, oh, it's opening up a network connection to port 53 somewhere. And then it's waiting for a really long time. And then there's a timeout. And then it opens up port 53 again. And then it's waiting for
DNS.
Right.
It's never DNS.
You can actually see what it's doing if you attach it to a running utility, and you can observe kind of when it gets stuck in these cycles. And then you can figure out what's happening during that cycle to then determine where else you have to go for your troubleshooting of a problem. All right, and then the last one, let me kick off a quick backend command here. Watch. Every 2 seconds, it runs the command again. And so before I ran this, I kicked off a utility that would just like make a giant file and suck up all of my disk space. And so I want you to draw your attention to is this line, right? Because that's sitting there in the background running, slurping up my disk space. And you can see that every 2 seconds, we're going to update our watch. And sure enough, we can see it actually like changing the state of the system over time. So Control C will kill it. And I'm going to kill all that DD. So there we go. And so I use watch a lot for things like a really long process. I'll do a cat on its log file, or there's a command for image builder called image builder CLI, or sorry, composer CLI, where you can give it a compose ID and it'll query it and tell you its status. And so I could like have that over here while I was building my rel image, and I can watch it occur. And then I'll know when it's done instead of having to query later or, query it and it's not done and I have to wait longer.
But can I make it beep every time it refreshes?
You know what? For Unate,
it's a command to do that.
I think you can. Composite command of several things together to make the beeps happen. But Nate like ship you a UPS and you can unplug it from the wall and you can get
There
as
we
many
go.
beeps as you
Oh,
Did it just beep all the time,
Kill me.
incessantly? I'll just plug something really low power usage into it so it lasts forever.
exactly. I'm sure your family would love that.
which they do
Ah,
exist. I saw enter his office, so
are
they
you
do
suggesting that
exist.
they're all a lie?
I wasn't sure.
All right, we are an hour in, and we just hit the halfway mark.
53 commands in, and I made the joke on Monday. What if this 100th episode with 100 commands ended up being 100 minutes long? But
It may.
but
All right.
I have noticed that performance optimization or performance management and disk are not nearly as humorous as apparently networking is. So let's
Apparently.
see how virtualization fares, Nate.
All right, so we're going to talk about some virtualization commands. Now, this is virtualization with libvirt and KVM. This is in my home lab here. That's how I run the thing. As I mentioned before, you could manage this stuff with Cockpit, but I come from a very long background of managing KVM hosts from the command line, even in a clustered environment. I can tell you it's rewarding in its own way. Okay, so Virsh is the thing that you interact with libvirt with. So I've got a number of VMs running on this host. We're going to do a Virsh list, and it'll show us all the running hosts. On its command, if we do a list -a, it shows us, it's not a, it's -- all, isn't it? It shows you all of the hosts, right? Or all of the guests, including the ones that are shut off. So that's helpful thing. That's helpful if you're trying to see, like, what was the name of that system again before I turned it off? Well, there it is. You can edit these things. They're all based in XML. If I do a Virsh edit on ITT0, you might recognize this as one of the two hosts I've been doing all my demos on today. You can see here, like, it's got a UUID, it's got a name, it's got how much memory assigned to it, it's got, all of the things you'd expect inside of a definition for a VM, right? Including like the disks and whether there's a CD-ROM attached and if there was an ISO attached to that CD-ROM, where the path is. It's all right here. Everything is right here. And the really cool thing about it all being right there inside of XML is you can do a Virsh dump XML. Dump XML talking about on the guest you're talking about, and it'll just dump all of it out, which you can then throw into a file. And if you wanted to take that and put it on a different host, of course, you then have to copy the disk images that are associated with it as well, and any other files or hardware devices that it depends on need to be present on the other side. You can literally just then use Virsh define, I think it is, to re-import that XML on another libvirt host. So this stuff is crazy portable, which is one of the things I really like about libvirt. I don't have an example cooked up for this, but there's a tool called virt install. If you look, let's see, if I go into bin, I have a little script set up here to make VMs with sh. Here we go. You can see I'm calling virt install here with a bunch of arguments. I didn't want to run this as we're on the show because it takes time to build a VM. But you can see I'm basically saying virt install, give it a name based on a command line that I threw in there, command line argument, how much memory to give it, how many CPUs to give it, what variation of the operating system it's running, things like that. A couple other specifics. You can add in stuff like, you can see I pass in cloud init at the end. Virt install is a really nice tool for if you want to automate VM builds. So when I need to kick off a new VM, the VMs for this lab I kicked off like 2 hours before the show started. I ran this command twice. I went and I set the networks, and then boom, I had 2 VMs ready to go. So it's really, really nice to take some of that manual labor out of making a new VM. Okay, we're going to quit out of that. And let's see, what else do I got? QEMU image. This is a way to make an empty disk image that you can then use on your libvirt system. You don't have to do this if you're using a tool that lets you like clicky through a VM creation. But if you did do virt install, for example, and you needed an empty disk to point it at, you could use QEMU image to make it. It's hard to say. So QEMU-img QEMU. Those of you who don't know, KVM which is what's back called QEMU. So that's why QEMU is in here. I forget what QEMU stands for. It's a very old hypervisor or virtualization platform you can run on Linux. Anyway, I digress. So QEMU image, we're going to do create because we're going to make a new disk image. We're going to give a format to that disk image, QCOW2, QCO. This is hard to type. QCOW2, and then we're going to give it a file name. We're going to just call it disk.qcow2. QCOW2 is a disk format that supports thin provisioning, which is why I'm using that instead of there are raw formats. You can do -f raw. That'll allocate the entire disk after you issue the command. Thin provision means that it makes like a stub of a disk, and it'll let you fill up to a maximum size. I'm going to make that maximum size 1 gig just for the sake of example. And there you go. Formatting disk.qcow2 with the format, yada, yada, yada. ls-l on disk.qcow2. And you'll see the thing is not 1 gigabyte. And that's because it's a thin provision disk. So this means that it's there. You can fill up to 1 gigabyte, but it only has like this framework of the disk that's actually existing on your hypervisor's disk. So it saves a lot of space. Another great tool is virtclone. What that'll do is it'll let you take one VM and clone it to another. And what I used to use this for in the case of our old hypervisor, our whole cluster, was we had to find a basic VM that met our standards, right? And then we had that defined inside of libvirt. But we didn't actually run that machine. It was called a clone me. We could have called it a sheep or whatever. I don't know, but we called it clone me. That was the name of the thing. So when you want to make a new VM, you would say virtclone, you'd give it the source, you'd give it a destination name, and it would take that VM and copy it to a new VM. And we had it all set up so that the disk was sanitized and whatever, so all the identifying data was out. So on first boot, it would do things like generate new SSH keys and all the things that have to happen when you make an actual new machine. But it's a really nice way to save time. If I wanted to take ITT0 and clone it to ITT3, I could use virtclone to do it. So it's really handy, really good way to make an exact copy of a existing system. And that's virtualization. I had a couple more examples here for the next section, but anything we want to talk about virtualization-wise first?
So the important question in chat is, does QCOW2 support cows?
It supports copy on write, I think, is what cow stands for. Is that what that means?
He missed it, Scott.
I could be wrong. No. I get it. Does it support actual cows? I don't think there's any cows in my hypervisor. Cowsay could be in there. I saw some mention of that in there. Can we clone cows instead of sheep? Oh, maybe that's how it supports them.
There you go. Yeah, you use virtclone to clone your cows.
Virtclone to clone your cows.
That's where my milk comes from. Got it.
Clone cows.
All right. Next two commands. Go for it.
Yeah, the next are some environment things, which are actually really helpful when you're doing things like scripting, or I don't know, maybe you just forgot what time it is and you need to know what time it is. The date command will give you that. Gives you the date and the time, but that's not always useful. Say I'm making a shell script to like back up my data and I want to add a date stamp into the file that I've backed it up to. Date is really good for that. And this I'm going to copy because I'm going to typo this 100 times if I try to type it out manually. But
so funny enough, I've had that problem in the past, and I actually found a website that you type in the date and it'll spit out the date command for you.
That's handy. So date allows you to change the output format, right? And people will probably argue as to what the proper format for a backup file is, but it's really going to depend on how often you're doing backups and when you're doing them, things like that. But in this case, we're doing date. Capital Y is the year. M is the day of the month, I think. No, M is the month. Sorry, M is the month, like the numerical 0 to 12 or 1 to 12, and there is no month 0. And then D is the day of the month, right? So if I run that, you're going to see we get like this nice little formatted date string that's just 2024 0322 because that's today's date. So if I was making a backup file, I could throw that into a variable, or I could use it in an escape sequence that it would auto-populate that in the name of the file, and there you go. You got your date stamp.
I've used this in a lot of I've used this in scripts and whatnot when I want to track when a process started and when it stopped. So take date, pipe it into your script, and it'll say you can add some text to it and say this operation backing up the database at XYZ time. Thank you, Nate. That's that getting us closer to a minute per command.
Yeah.
So speaking of scripts, Scott, would you like to talk a little bit about scripting?
Sure. So another oldie but goodie. Way back in episode 18, we talked about writing shell scripts. But there's actually a whole bunch of scripting languages included in RHEL, like Python. So, oops. See, this is what happens. There we go. Python.
Let me out of here.
There we go. So we ship 3.9. We also ship Nate's personal favorite.
Oh, please,
Perl.
no, don't.
Hey, look, it's the extractioniest and languageiest of the scripting languages.
Indeed. You know, I heard that the latest edition of Perl has been renamed to something, Raku, R-A-K-U. I didn't even know. But yeah, Perl, my first language. That was the first, other than Bash and like Batch in the Windows days. Perl is my first like real language that I learned.
I had a systems administrator manager who used Perl like I use Bash commands.
So that had really good reporting. And by reporting, I mean like formatted printing, the ability to like extract data out of the middle of other pieces of data. So you could use like regexes, not what we're going to cover with sed, but like you could do it all in one command. Or sorry, not command. You could build your own custom scripting that would be your own program to do all that stuff. All right, and then on the terminal here, I just ran bash and it invoked another shell for me. But running bash is kind of silly. I think where we get into more interest is when you make your own script. And you usually start with a shebang so that we know what interpreter to use. And this would also hold true for Python and Perl and some of the others. Probably not C. It's not an interpreted language, so that one not so much. But all the interpreted languages, you tell it what interpreter to use. All right. So we'll come back to this script in just a second, because I want to talk about a couple other command line things that you can do to get data. So for example, one of the things that we use a lot is sed. And Nate, I'm going to put you on blast here. Do you remember what sed stands for?
Streamline editor, right?
Stream editor. Very good.
Stream editor.
See, this is why Nate's the host now. Eric.
You think Eric, would you have known that?
Nope.
I hope you don't ask me what OGG stands for, though, because I have no idea.
It's the sound birds make.
Oh, okay, good.
So sed is a stream editor. So you like feed it, you use a series of edits that you want made to that file. And the edits are going to be a command. So in this case, I'm going to substitute. Then you give it what you want to substitute, which is a regular expression. I'm using a really simple one of just colons. Anytime you see a colon, make the substitution. Then the next thing is what you want to replace that colon with. So I just said space. And then G at the end is a modifier that says do this globally throughout the entire file. Otherwise, it probably stops the first time on a line that it experiences the colon and does substitution. And so, right, this is what Etsy password looks like. We didn't use colons instead of spaces or use spaces instead of colons to separate all the content.
Looks so much easier to separate that way. I don't know why we don't do it that way.
That's right, because like especially the Nginx web server, that should entirely be 3 different fields in the file. So You could do all kinds that. Remember that horrible command we were talking about with tlog earlier? I'm sure I use a set in that to like get
Probably.
rid of or to only pull out things that I'm interested in that stream of log content.
I've used sed to make interactive changes. Like for instance, for my Leap upgrade labs, I'll use a sed command to change the SSH default login to permit root false, and switch it from true. That way, rel 8 will do an in place upgrade to rel 9 without getting an error message.
Yeah, like or putting it into a script that you do post installation to make some tweaks to configuration files before you ship the machine off or start it up for the first time. Like those are all great uses of sed. The other command line utility that you can use for quick and dirty programming would be awk. So here's an example of using awk. So I'm going to
What's
use the
that stand
same
for,
data.
Nate?
So awk is taking data that we get passed either through a pipeline or through a redirect and then can do a whole bunch of stuff on it. Where I see it used most commonly is just a really quick program. Awk has its own programming syntax. So this is a quick awk program to print something to the screen. We're going to print the first field out of the data that we get, then a tab, and then the third field of the data we get. Here we go. We saw the Etsy password file with spaces instead of colons. Well, now we're just going to see the username and the user ID number, and there's a tab separator between them.
Yeah.
So you can do stuff like that. There's other commands you could use too to get the same thing, but like cut or that kind of stuff. But awk has a whole bunch of controlling programmatic features that you can use to say, if it's this, then do these things, or
Right.
regular expression
That's
matching inside of it.
that's the really cool stuff, that you can use logic against these things, right? Like if the first value is greater than 5, print the third value, right? It's pretty cool.
Right. Yeah. Something else that's quick and dirty on the command line is sort. So if you use du to show disk usage on your machine, it shows you all the files and their size in blocks. But maybe you're not really interested in all the files and their size. Maybe you're interested in the largest files on your disk. So we're going to pipe that to sort. And I told it to reverse the sort. So show me biggest things, not smallest things first. And N, treat that first thing as a number instead of character-based sorting. And so it runs the same list of files, but now it says, all right, here's where the large things are, right? So if I'm looking for something like, where can I go to clean up space because I've just discovered my disks are full, you can find out where your file system is using the most space, what directories contain the largest collections of files. All right, but back into scripting. All right, so when you're writing a script, this is going to be a super simple, very quick one. You can echo. That's going to print a message from your script. And echo by itself just prints a blank line. Prompt the user for, actually, we'll retrieve input from the user. I'm using -P to say, also ask the user a question before you read the input. And I need to give it a variable at the end. So from the user, maybe we need to make a choice off of it. And so here we're using the if command and also true or false value. And the EQ command on commands here in scripting.
Yeah, we're just blowing that number out of the water. I think Shantanu would disagree, though. It's always got to be a.
I like pirates. They're my favorite.
It's always got to be a pirate.
Yeah, so we have the then command, which says after this if results to a true or false, then do this task. Else, if it turns out you failed the check, what should we do instead? And then fee, yet another command, which is the backwards of if, to close out this control structure. All
It
right,
is
so
kind of
now-
hilarious how so many closes of statements or of containers like that in Bash are just the same thing spelled backwards. Like case. You close it with ESAC.
You can see that I put the a bogus test in my conditional. Here's why.
Did you break it? Oh, I see why. You didn't.
He
put
did.
the-
He did break it.
You broke it. What could go wrong, Scott?
It's a live left. Geez. Oh, integer expression. Hold on, I'm using the wrong comparison operator. So dash eq equal.
Equally.
let's
Take off the cute. There we go.
All right. Yes. So we got the right thing. And what if I say
Yay!
robot? Well, robot is not the same as pirate, so you get the else branch of your script.
Your script is not very inclusive, Scott. It only treats pirates in the way that they prefer to be treated, and everybody else gets treated in English.
Well, yes, because only pirates are special, Nate. One
Okay.
one could argue that ninjas are also special, but we don't ever see them, so how would we know?
It's true. True.
Oh, I'm gonna get called by HR now.
All right, we got to roll along. We're running out of time here.
Man. So I have the next section as well, which is some user stuff. And I know that we did a managing users episode. It was like one of our very first episodes, Eric.
Yeah, let
Like
me see, because my person who set up the section didn't cite his episodes.
I know that was my fault.
Oh, we
All
were
right.
supposed to do that? Oops.
So another command that we use a lot is sudo. Sudo allows you to have a regular user become privileged to do a specific task. And we've gone ahead and set up the rel user to be root equivalent. So as long as they use sudo, they can pretty much do whatever root can do if they prefix it with sudo. So here I'm just going to install some software. But before we just let anyone walk up and sudo something, you actually have to prove your identity to show that you're actually that user, not just some rando that walked up to the keyboard. All right, so there we go. So here we are running running that DNF install. And then when it completes, it sends me back to being my unprivileged self. And I can verify that with Whoami. You can run Whoami to see who you are logged into the system. We can also look at things.
Who
Yeah,
am I? Who
Whoami.
pronounces it that way? It's who am I?
No, because who am I is this. All right, so who am I is actually a separate command on most other Unixes,
Who am
which
I?
is why it's Whoami.
That's more
Whatever.
fun.
So we could do things like as root, we can look at people's user information with ID. So I can look at the user ID numbers and group ID numbers and what groups this person is a member of using ID on a specific user. We can also look at a subset of that. So I could do a groups on rel. And these are the groups that the user rel belongs to the rel group and the wheel group. And it turns out the wheel group membership is what gave them the root equivalent sudo access. We can also look at password aging information. And actually, Eric showed us this earlier. So if we do a change-l on rel, We could see things like when they last changed their password, or if there's any password limitation data of storage for this user, like how many days they are allowed to keep a password or when their account expires.
No,
We can
that's
also
cheating.
look
I
at
already used that command.
well, I added a bunch in scripting, so it's fine. We can see the last command shows you who's logged into the system. And I don't know who that ME guy is, but he logs into my system a lot. Or that reboot guy. The reboot guy logs in a
Creepy.
lot. And lastly, as root, you may recognize this command to change your password, but as root, you can change other people's passwords. And notice it doesn't ask you what their password is first. So it just assigns whatever you say as their password, right? We do that. And even if it's a bad password, we'll make the assignment. So this is how you do things like password resets on RHEL. So we're at like command
80.
70. Yeah,
70?
getting to be at 80.
Coming up on 80.
Nate, I'll hand it to you.
Compression and archival tools. There was an episode about this, I believe, or maybe a part of another episode, but apparently I didn't do my homework. Sorry. We have to get the.
Oh gosh,
Come on. Where's
this is mine trying to keep track of all the
producer?
links.
Producer's getting the wrong terminal up. Okay, so zip and unzip. We're just gonna kind of blast through these quick. I've got a bunch of files here. We're just gonna make a zip archive out of them. So we're gonna do zip, and then we're gonna take. And this is the thing you have to install. There are two different packages, zip and unzip, to make these two work. So we're gonna do zip, and then we give it the name of the file, file.zip, and then the files we want to put in there. And of course, you can use, glomming with globbing, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Sorry if my dog's, I don't know what the heck she's barking at. So anyway, there we go. We have file.zip. You'll notice the compressed quote unquote archive is larger than my files because my files are empty. They're just here for example. I promise you that this does not make a larger archive out of smaller files. It's just the way it works out when the files are so small. And then of course, unzip. We're going to go into temp to do this. We're going to unzip this file up here, file.zip, and oops, ls-l. There we go. We've got F1, F2, and F3. So now we're going to delete those
Nate,
just because, yeah.
Nate, do you know why it's larger than your files?
It's because of metadata that goes along with the zip archive.
There you go.
Sorry.
See, I knew that one.
Didn't I? I'm hurrying here. Okay, we're at an hour and a half.
My next meeting's with my manager. It's fine.
I'm supposed to be on the road to a retirement party, so and my earpiece is dying. We have to wrap this up. Where was I? So we did zip and unzip. Now we're going to do tar and gzip and a couple other compression utilities usually go together, right? Tar isn't for compressing. It's actually just for like sticking files together so that you can take them into a tape archive, right? It doesn't really do compression exactly. So gzip can come along, or bzip, or I think there was another one that can come along and work along with tar, but we're going to show you tar, just like plain old bare tar here. So we're going to do tar CF, which stands for create file, I believe. And then we're going to do the name of the file we want to create. We're going to call it file.tar. And then we're going to take the same arguments, F1, F2, and F3. Those are my three files. And again, we're going to end up with an archive that's larger than our original one because of that metadata. You see that tar must store more metadata than zip does. So now that we have that, I'm going to show you how we can gzip and gunzip the tar file, or any file, honestly. What gzip will do is it'll take the file, so you just tell it file.tar, press enter, and what it's going to do is it's going to replace file.tar with file.tar.gz. And now you'll notice that it's much smaller than the original tar file was, right? Before it was what, almost a K, a little over a K, what, 1024, whatever. It was bigger. Now it's 135 bytes, right? So you can see that the gzip did do its job. Now you could then use gunzip to decompress. And then what it'll do is it takes the .gz extension, drops it off, and replaces it with the uncompressed version of the file you just compressed. So if we do gunzip and then file.tar.gz and then ls-l, there we are back to that larger file. And then if I go into my temp directory here and do a tar, what is it, xf? I have it in my notes here. Yes, xf, which stands for extract. We're going to take that file.tar, and then it'll extract it right to the directory that I'm in. And there's my F1, F2, and F3, just like we did with zip and unzip. So that's tar, gzip, gunzip, zip, and unzip. And we have one more that sort of ended up in archiving for some reason. Blame Scott. Is DD.
It was Scott's fault.
DD is an awesome utility. It's great for creating empty files or blowing away disks that you didn't intend to. So be careful. Your mileage may vary here. We're just going to copy and paste this for the sake of time. But basically, what I've got here is DD, which is data dumper, right? DD is what that stands for. You give it an input file. I've used dev0, which basically is just a stream of zeros. OF, I tell it where I want the output file to go. This is /out. I tell it the block size and how many of those blocks to write. And there we go. We have a roughly 4 megabyte file that was created from DD. What's so funny? Who's
Sorry, I should have been on mute, but it's than 100 minutes.
We should do that, right? And this might be a good example here, right? If we gzip, this this file that I just made, right? So right now it's 4 megabytes. If we gzip it, now we'll have a much smaller. It's 4,000. It's 4K now instead of 4 meg because it's all zeros. Zeros compress really well, right? So there we go. Better example of gzip. And that's it for compression utilities. Like I said, there's other utilities out there other than gzip. There's like bzip and a couple others. But for the sake of example, here we are.
I bet Nate can rapid fire the last 16 commands.
Yes, the last commands are basically, these are your absolute basics, right? And they're in here just because we can't have a list of 100 essential commands if you don't know how to get around your directory structure and things like that. So let's first of all clean up the screen a bit here. We've been using ls a lot, right? This gives you just a simple directory structure or a directory listing. ls-l will give you a long listing, including things like ownership and file sizes and creation dates, things like that. ls-al will show you hidden files. You see I have a hidden directory called Ansible. I have another one called cache and config because this is my home directory on this particular machine, right? So A. ls-Z will give us SE Linux contexts. Now these are important if you're trying to troubleshoot or even create files that need a specific SE Linux context. You can see what those contexts are right here from the LZ. You can also combine those commands with other things, right? So -A and -AL, -L, -AZ, right? These are all things that you can combine to make a thing, make combinations of the different outputs. Let's see, next on the list is cat. We're going to do cat-VET, and this is one of Scott's favorites. The -VET tells it to display hidden characters. So if you've got a file that has hidden characters like tabs or carriage returns or whatever, maybe it came from a Windows machine because they're notorious for having those hidden files or those hidden characters. This will show them to you so that you'll be like, well, why is the output not like I thought it was? Why is the file not parsing the way I thought it was? Well, this will help you see that. And we're just going to use a file that's in here. We use the index.html from earlier. And you see, it just shows you the contents of the file. Another very similar tool is called zcat. Zcat is really helpful because what zcat will do is take a compressed file, as long as that file is text, although it'll probably do this on files that aren't text. It'll just give you a bunch of gibberish on the screen. If you do zcat, you see I have a messages.gz here. I just took varlog messages, put it in my home directory, and then I gzipped it. we do messages.gz, it automatically does the decompression and then displays it to me, but it doesn't leave me with a decompressed file. I'm still right there where I was. So a lot of times your log rotation schemes are going to have a spot where the file that was rotated out becomes a separate compressed file. This way you can look in those files without having to decompress them first. And you can also tie that to other commands. Like you can pipe that output into grep. Or I guess there's, it looks like Shantanu's mentioning zgrep, which we didn't put on our list, but there you go. See, we're slowly adding up all those commands you said that were not actually commands. We're adding them in as we go, Shantanu. So, right.
Did you know that less actually does zcat if you less a encrypted or a compressed file?
Does it? Well, we're going to try that right now because that's another one on my list. In fact, it's the next one on my list. So we're going to we're going to less messages.gz. And there you go. You're right. Les did the zcat for me. So this gives us a paginated output. It's not even paginated. It's in what you would consider almost like an editor. You can do searches in here. Like if I want to search for Mar, because it's March, it'll highlight them for me and show them. I want to look for, see, I have a bunch of hibernation events there. You could search for the word hibernation. This is a great way to look through log files or just find something in a text file. So less is more, right? More is less. What do we got next?
Less is more.
Okay, the next is locate. If you've ever not been able to find a file on a Linux file system, don't worry, you're not alone, and locate is here to help you. It's not here by default. You have to install mlocate to get that to get that to work. We're just going to locate anything with the word password in it. So now you find any files in your file system that have the word password. And of course, you can get more sophisticated than that. This is a quick example. Let's say you need to know where you are in the directory structure. PWD. Eric, what does that stand for?
I know this one. It's print working directory.
Good job. PWD prints your working directory. So you can see where you are in the file system. If you were in like some gnarly deep directory, PWD will give you exactly where you're at. Let's see, CD. This is simple, right? CD, how do I move around? CD, what was the name of my subdirectory here? Files, right? Wasn't it?
Compact disk.
Here we go. If I do PWD again, we've got, you can see that we're inside of the files directory now. Some really cool extra commands that go along with CD. If you want to get to your home directory, you do CD space tilde. Takes you right back to your home directory. If you want to get back to the last directory you were in, CD space dash will take you back where you just were. Like, oh crap, I didn't mean to switch out of that directory, or what path was it, or I don't want to type it again. CD dash gets you right back there. There's probably a bunch of other shortcuts for CD that I'm not thinking of at the moment.
If you type straight up CD, it takes you to your home directory as well.
There you go. CD will also take you to your home directory. That tilde, by the way, is a great way to put in any kind of file path. So if you want to say, put a file in my home directory, you can copy it to tilde, and it'll go right to your home directory. Okay, my earpiece has reminded me once again that the battery's dying. So I've got like 7 more commands to get through.
You got this.
All right, move, MV, not ME, MV will let you move file. Let me clear my screen so you guys can see better. So let's pick a file. We're going to MV. Move also works as a good way to rename a file. So if you just want to rename something, you're essentially doing the same command as moving. So we use the same command on Linux. So MV messages to like messages.gz2, I don't know. And now you can see it's been renamed. And now Bash doesn't recognize it as an archive anymore. Doesn't highlight it for me. But MV and a bunch of the other commands we're about to go about have a command line argument that you might want to care about. -I think it stands for interactive, which basically means if I'm going to move a thing and it's going to overwrite another thing, the -I will make it prompt me to say, yeah, I really did want to do that. So if I do mv index.html to messages.gz2, it should say, are you sure? Right? You want to overwrite that? Then I have to tell it yes or no. Well, I'm going to tell it no. You can override that with -F. If I add a -F here, it'll be like, yes, I absolutely want to do that. And then it just doesn't even ask me. Now, in RHEL, for root, and I don't think for normal users, maybe that's changed for normal users now too, but it always used to be in root, the dash I is added to MV, RM, CP, and a couple other commands so that you don't accidentally mess things up as root as easily as you might as a normal user, right? Because root has a lot more power. So just keep that in mind. So if you're working as root and you haven't changed that, dash F might be your friend, especially in scripting where you want to move a thing and you don't want it to be sitting there saying, "Are you sure?" So keep that in mind. All right, RM deletes a file. So if I want to do RM the messages.gz2, that'll just delete it. And again, gives me that dash I option. I'm going to say no because I don't actually want to delete this. Dash F again will force that. And CP will let me copy a file. So if I want to CP messages.gz2 back to messages.gz, now I have 2 copies of messages. And again, I know these are really simple commands, but how do you not include these when you're talking about 100 commands, right? And again, you've got the dash I and the dash F options for CP. Another great one here is the touch command. What touch will do is it'll make a file. An empty file. You may have noted, for example, we're all empty. Touch is exactly how I made them. If I want to make a directory, mkdir some directory. Now I've got a new directory there, right? And our very last command in the list is file. File is really useful to try to identify not what's in a file, but what type of file it is, right? It'll give you some information about what's in there, but this is like the file system metadata about a file. I do file on messages.gz. It'll tell me it's an HTML document. Well, it's not an HTML document, right? It ends in .gz. But do you remember what I did earlier? I copied that index.html file on top of messages.gz. So even though Bash even thinks it's a GZ file by highlighting it red, it's actually not. It's an HTML file. If I cat it right now, you'll see that the contents of that index.html are still in there. And file is smart enough to figure that out. File is really useful for if you're looking for, like, is this thing I'm about to open up in a text editor binary or text? Right? Because sometimes you don't want to open up a binary file in a text editor because it really messes with your terminal. And I think that's it. What did I miss?
Well,
Nate, I know you got to get on the road, so I'm going to say
I do.
and your service today. And Eric and I can go ahead and close out the episode. I did want to end on one last command. We've covered actually over 100, by the way, if anyone's keeping track.
Well,
it's like 100.
Nate counted dash I and dash F as 2 commands. So I think Scott added some extras in scripting. So I think somewhere in there, but Scott, I think you had one more that wasn't on the list that we're going to add just to make sure.
Just for today. Here we go. Bam. No.
I do got to run. This has been great. Thank you all the people who are viewing today. We got so many more viewers than normal today, but I do have to drop to get on the road. Thank you for
yeah. Go ahead, Nate. We'll land the plane while you jump out with a parachute.
So, cool. Have a great.
So in case you all missed, in case you didn't see it because Scott didn't narrate it, Scott did an rm-rf on slash. So everything actually slash
star.
So everything is currently being deleted. Which I think includes the show. Okay, so here's the thing, Scott. I swore when you suggested this idea. I mean, I've nominated myself as our producer, which today reminds me of why I produced this show, because there's just so much that goes on that I couldn't host and produce like I do Rel Presents. So I stepped back and let Nate come in, and he's been an amazing host. And don't tell him I said that, and tell him not to watch the recording. But the connection dropped.
It deleted SSH.
But I mean, this show has been so much fun. Oh, what I was saying about this episode, and I've got to tie into our wrap up. But what I have got to say that when you proposed this idea on Monday, the initial reaction from Nate and I was, "You are insane. Go take a walk and come back." but neither of us had anything cool to do for our 100th episode. So I said, okay, as the producer, as the host, yes, let's do it. I'm all about crazy ideas. And the show actually started with one of those, which was also your fault.
Yeah,
I
indeed.
said my
This is
only
the most insane thing we did since we started the show.
yes. My caveat was that this not be 100 minutes for 100 commands on our 100th episode. And while I was proven right, we were not going to do a 100-minute long episode. We're actually sitting at 106 minutes coming up. So I should have specified keep it under 90, but we didn't. But it's okay. But I mean that's been what the show's about. It used to be on a different day. It used to be at a different time, and so Friday at lunchtime just seemed like the right place for this. And thank you, Shantanu, because we were freaking out this morning. Like, is this actually going to work? But I mean, gosh, ITT just passed its 2-year anniversary, and now we've hit 100 episodes, and it's been so much fun. And we've got plans for hopefully a few more. We've actually got plans for a couple of dozen more. But Scott, this show actually started with an experiment. So how did we launch this show initially?
So the reason we're at 100 episodes is because our first month we produced an episode every single day, and then we actually repeated it twice because we weren't sure like when people would tune in. So we did one every morning at 10 a.m. and one every evening at like 8 p.m. Trying to pick up the West Coasters and Asia folks. But yeah, like honestly, Eric, this has been a grueling episode to run through, but not nearly as grueling as coming up with 25 shows and then recording them every single day for 25 days. So
Yeah, those 2 days were brutal. I think that was more brutal than having 25 topics. So when we started, it's like we're a show about systems administration. This should be easy, right? And I think that was easier though than the 2-a-days. But yeah, into the terminal, 100 episodes. Scott and Nate, you guys are doing awesome as hosts. I'm really proud to. I have a lot more fun as the host, but I'm really proud to be producing the show and seeing where it goes from here. So, do we have? Oh, we do have a topic. So I was going to throw Nate under the bus for this. So what's 101?
what's 101?
What's episode 101 going to be?
Oh, episode
Next
101,
week.
workloads arc. And we covered basic web server, which according to our viewer statistics, nobody really cares about. But so now we're going to do an actual service. Like we're going to start off with WordPress. That's also going to mix in some database stuff to make a more complex application that we deploy on top of our machine.
So the gauntlet has been dropped, Scott. Shantanu says 200 commands for the 200th episode.
Man, that means we have to make it to 200 episodes.
Well, we are on our way. We'll be wrapping up our services arc. Well, Nate and Scott will. If you missed it, I can't over promote last week's episode, the Bad Batch episode, where Brian Smith and myself from Rel Presents took over Into the Terminal, and we talked about the GNOME desktop. Some tips and tricks, and we didn't even cover half of what we'd planned for. So we might have to do a takeover episode again. But speaking of Rel Presents, this past week we met with a couple of folks to talk about. Yeah, I got the same notification there, Scott. Our team meeting is coming up in 10 minutes. So this past Wednesday we talked about Stratus, a file system utility management tool. I'm still not sure how to classify it. It's not a file system, but it's a system that manages file systems. So check out Stratus. Really excited. Coming up in about a week and a half, we're going to be talking about, I don't know, I called it the life cycle of a subscription. We're going to be talking about subscriptions, life cycle, activation keys, and so much more on Rel Presents with Rich Dorito. He's joining us for his typical spring update. So looking forward to touching base with him next week to figure out what we're talking about. But we'll be live here in 2 weeks with that.
And if you've not seen a Rich Dorito episode of something, Rich Dorito is the czar of subscriptions at Red Hat. So like how do you register machines? How do we count them? What's the difference between like VDC and what are the mechanics for doing that? And what about RHEL in the cloud? Like, dude knows all the things about subscriptions.
Yeah, he takes a topic that most people take for granted and makes it really interesting. I always learn stuff when he comes on the show. Very, very charismatic person. Really glad to call him a friend and coworker. So join us for RHEL Presents. It'll be much more interesting than it sounds. I guarantee you that. Also coming up, first full week of May, so May 6th through the 9th, is Red Hat Summit. So if you haven't yet, try and grab a ticket, beg your boss, drive around on Uber, whatever you've got to do to raise the money to come to Red Hat Summit. It'll be in Denver, Colorado in May. I'll be there. Scott and Nate will be there. Matthew, one of our teammates, will be there. And so many Red Hatters, customers, partners, enthusiasts. It'll be an amazing time. Lots to go on there. And then one final note. Thank you to everyone who hung out for the live show. We're at 1 hour, 51 minutes almost. And I think this is the best turnout for an Into the Terminal episode ever. I saw it peak around 30, 35 people watching this live. So if you're in the chat, if you've watched this live, thank you. This was so much fun with all of you. And you get to see some of the banter that kind of goes on behind the scenes. And as Ken says, yes, your OS does matter. And it cannot be faked. Right, Scott?
That's right.
So on behalf of Nate, Scott, and myself, our hosts for today, and on behalf of the entire Red Hat Enterprise Linux team, he vamps as he pulls up the outro bumper. Thank you all for joining us. This has been Into the Terminal, episode 100, where we did, in fact, cover 100 commands to celebrate our 100th episode. We'll see you all next week. Scott,
Bye,
are you going to say your ridiculous line?
Happy Into the Terminaling.
We'll see y'all.